Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Valiant and stared at the message that had just arrived from the Galactic Council. His hands gripped the edge of the command console as he read the words again, hoping he had misunderstood something. He had not. The Council was demanding that Earth surrender 50% of its entire agricultural output for the next 10 years, and conscript 2 million soldiers for their latest war. Jake felt his jaw tighten as he forwarded the message to Admiral Lisa Carter back on Earth. The Valiant had been stationed near the Council's primary space station for 3 months now, serving as humanity's diplomatic presence in this corner of space. For 30 years, humanity had been part of the Galactic Council, and for 30 years, Jake had watched his people be treated like servants. The Council took what they wanted and gave nothing in return. They demanded Earth's resources, used human soldiers as expendable troops in their wars, and denied humanity any real voice in galactic affairs. Jake remembered the first time he had met Council representatives as a young officer. He had been excited, filled with wonder at the prospect of joining a community of advanced civilizations. That excitement had died quickly. The Council species looked at humans the way a farmer might look at livestock, useful but beneath consideration. They took Earth's technology and claimed it as their own. They wrote trade agreements that benefited everyone except humanity. They sent human soldiers to die in conflicts that had nothing to do with Earth's interests. The communication panel beeped, and Admiral Carter's face appeared on the screen. She looked tired, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, her uniform perfectly pressed despite the late hour in her time zone. She had been reviewing the Council's latest demand, and Jake could see the anger in her eyes. Admiral Carter had spent 15 years negotiating with the Council, trying to secure fair treatment for humanity. She had argued for voting rights, for technology sharing, for basic respect. The Council had smiled politely and ignored every request. They viewed Earth as a resource to be exploited, nothing more. The Admiral spoke quietly, but her words carried weight. She told Jake to maintain position but prepare for new orders. Something in her tone suggested that things were about to change. Jake acknowledged the message and turned to his crew. They had all read the Council's demand, and they all knew what it meant. If Earth complied, millions would starve. Cities would empty as young people were shipped off to fight in someone else's war. It would break humanity's spirit. Back on Earth, Admiral Carter walked through the corridors of Fleet Command in Geneva. She carried a datapad filled with 30 years of Council abuses, stolen patents, exploited resources, casualty reports from wars Earth never wanted to fight. She had documented everything, waiting for the moment when someone in power would finally listen. That moment had come. President Daniel Hayes sat in his office reviewing the same reports. He was a practical man who had come to office promising to protect Earth's interests. For 2 years he had tried diplomacy with the Council. He had offered compromises and sought middle ground. The Council had responded with more demands. They saw negotiation as weakness. President Hayes closed the final report and looked at Admiral Carter. His decision was made. Humanity would not comply with the Council's demand. More than that, humanity would no longer negotiate at all. Every human ship would be withdrawn from Council space. Every diplomatic channel would be closed. Earth's answer to the Council would be a single word. No. Admiral Carter felt something release in her chest. For 15 years she had bent over backwards trying to find a peaceful solution. She had swallowed insults and accepted unfair terms, always hoping that patience would eventually earn humanity respect. It had not. The Council only understood strength, and they had mistaken human patience for weakness. That mistake was about to cost them dearly. The orders went out within the hour. Every human vessel in Council space received the same message: return to Earth immediately. All diplomatic staff were recalled. All trade agreements were terminated. All communication with Council representatives was to cease. The era of negotiation was over. Captain Morrison received his orders while standing on the Valiant's bridge. He read them twice to make sure he understood correctly. Then he turned to his crew and gave the order to set course for Earth. Around the galaxy, other human ships did the same. Within hours, humanity's presence in Council space began to disappear. On the Council station, Ambassador Krivan of the Zerath Empire noticed the human ships departing. The Zerath were the most powerful species in the Council, and they had grown used to other races obeying their commands without question. Krivan sent a message to the Valiant demanding an explanation. The message was ignored. He sent another, this time threatening sanctions and military action. Again, no response. Creven called an emergency council session. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in the Great Chamber. He explained that humanity was withdrawing from council space without authorization. Several representatives seemed unconcerned. Humans were a minor species, easily replaced, but Creven sensed something different this time. The humans were not begging for mercy or asking for better terms. They were simply leaving. President Hayes prepared to address the galaxy. His speech would be brief and final. He stood before the cameras in the White House and spoke with calm certainty. He explained that humanity had sought partnership with the Council for 30 years. In return, Earth had been exploited and disrespected. The Council's latest demand would cause mass starvation on Earth, and humanity would not comply. More than that, humanity would no longer engage in any negotiation with the Council. Earth's borders were now closed to all Council ships. Any vessel entering human space without permission would be considered hostile. The speech lasted 3 minutes. President Hayes did not raise his voice or make threats. He simply stated facts and announced decisions. When he finished, he turned off the broadcast and walked away. There was nothing more to say. Ambassador Creven watched the speech with growing disbelief. No species had ever withdrawn from the Council. No species had ever refused a direct demand. The arrogance of these humans was beyond comprehension. He immediately drafted a response filled with warnings and ultimatums. He sent it to every human communication channel he could find. All of his messages bounced back undelivered. The humans had meant what they said. They were done talking. The Valiant crossed into Earth's solar system 4 days later. Captain Morrison looked at the blue planet growing larger on his view screen and felt something he had not felt in years. Pride. Humanity had finally stood up for itself. The Council would not accept this defiance quietly. There would be consequences. But for the first time since joining the galactic community, humans would face those consequences as free people who had refused to bow. Ambassador Creven paced in his chambers aboard the Council station and tried to understand what had just happened. In 300 years of galactic history, no species had ever refused a Council demand. The very idea was absurd. The Council represented the combined power of 60 civilizations, commanded fleets that numbered in the thousands, and controlled trade routes across half the galaxy. One small species from an unremarkable planet could not simply say no and expect to survive. Creven called together the senior council members and laid out his proposal. Humanity needed to be taught a lesson that would echo across the galaxy. If other species saw that defiance was possible, the entire council structure would collapse. He suggested sending a punitive fleet to Earth, not to conquer but to intimidate. A show of overwhelming force would bring the humans back to negotiations on their knees. The council voted and approved Creven's plan with little debate. Most representatives viewed it as a minor police action. The Zerath Empire would provide the bulk of the fleet since they had the most ships available. Admiral Vorek, a decorated Zerath commander with victories in a dozen campaigns, volunteered to lead the mission. He saw it as easy duty, a chance to add another achievement to his record without any real risk. Admiral Vorek assembled 300 warships at the edge of Council space. He chose his most impressive vessels, massive cruisers and battleships that would fill human sensors with overwhelming images of power. His strategy was simple: arrive in Earth's solar system, demonstrate superior force, and wait for humanity to surrender. He expected the entire operation to take less than a week. The fleet departed with great ceremony. Creven watched the ships jump to faster-than-light travel and felt satisfied. In a few days, the humans would remember their place and the galaxy would return to normal. He was already planning the terms of Earth's new submission. The penalties would be severe enough to discourage future defiance, but not so harsh as to destroy a useful resource. Meanwhile, on Earth, Admiral Carter stood in a command center deep beneath the lunar surface. Commander Ryan Blake sat at the central console coordinating defensive preparations. For 30 years, humanity had been building weapons and defenses that the Council knew nothing about. Every time the Council had demanded human technology, Earth had complied but never revealed everything. Every trade agreement had been carefully managed to hide humanity's true capabilities. Commander Blake pulled up a tactical display showing the solar system. Red dots marked the positions of 300 automated defense platforms hidden in asteroid fields and orbital debris. Green dots showed 50 human warships positioned at strategic points. Blue lines indicated the network of sensors and communication relays that covered every approach to Earth. This was Project Horizon, a defensive system 30 years in the making. Admiral Carter had overseen much of Project Horizon's development. She had argued with politicians who thought it was a waste of resources and convinced military leaders to maintain secrecy even from their own allies. Every human ship returning from Council space had brought back intelligence about Council tactics and weapons. Every conflict the Council forced humanity to fight in had been a learning opportunity. Humans had watched, studied, and adapted. Captain Morrison brought the Valiant to dock at Luna Base and immediately reported to the command center. Admiral Carter briefed him on the coming battle. The Council fleet would arrive within 48 hours. Human forces would not attempt to match the Council's numbers. Instead, they would use speed, deception, and weapons the Council had never encountered. Captain Helen Grant commanded a squadron of stealth destroyers, small fast ships that could hide from most sensors. She had trained her crews for 5 years in hit-and-run tactics. Lieutenant Commander Paul Henderson led a Marine unit specialized in boarding actions. Major Chris Taylor commanded fighter squadrons equipped with missiles that could bypass energy shields. Each unit had a specific role in the defensive plan. Admiral Vorek's fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system, exactly when Admiral Carter's analysts had predicted. Vorek immediately broadcast a message demanding humanity's surrender. He gave Earth 24 hours to respond or face military action. His tone was arrogant and dismissive. He genuinely believed the humans would give up without a fight. The human response was silence. No messages, no broadcasts, no diplomatic channels opened. Admiral Vorek interpreted this as shock and fear. He ordered his fleet to advance toward Earth at a leisurely pace, giving the humans time to appreciate the size of the force arrayed against them. His ships moved in a standard Council formation, large vessels in the center with smaller ships screening the flanks. Commander Blake watched the Council fleet advance and waited for them to reach the first trigger point. The automated defense platforms had been positioned along the most likely approach route. Each platform was small and cold, hidden among asteroids and space debris. Council sensors would not detect them until it was too late. The Council fleet crossed the trigger line. Commander Blake activated the first wave of platforms. 200 automated stations came online simultaneously and launched missiles at the Council formation. The missiles were not sophisticated, but they were fast and came from unexpected directions. Admiral Vorek's ships scrambled to respond, but their formation had been designed for show rather than combat efficiency. Captain Grant's stealth destroyers appeared, behind the Council fleet like ghosts materializing from darkness. Her ships fired electromagnetic pulse weapons that had been developed from captured Council technology and improved with human innovation. 3 Council cruisers lost power and began drifting. 2 destroyers collided, trying to evade missile strikes they had not seen coming. Admiral Vorek realized with growing horror that he had walked into a trap. The humans were not cowering in fear. They were hunting his ships with precision and coordination that should not have been possible for such a primitive species. He ordered his fleet to regroup and prepare for a proper battle. His ships began moving into defensive formations while his officers scrambled to locate all the human vessels. Captain Morrison led his squadron in from the flank. The Valiant and 12 other human ships targeted the Council flagship with kinetic weapons. Simple chunks of metal accelerated to extreme speeds. The Council's energy shields were designed to stop laser and plasma weapons. They did nothing against solid projectiles moving at a fraction of light speed. The flagship's hull cracked and atmosphere began venting into space. Commander Blake triggered the second wave of platforms. This time they fired focused electromagnetic pulses that disabled entire wings of Council fighters. Major Taylor's squadron swept through the confused enemy formation, their missiles targeting command ships and sensor arrays. Every strike was calculated to maximize disruption rather than simple destruction. The battle lasted 6 hours. Admiral Vorek tried everything he knew, but the humans countered each tactic. They used the terrain of their own solar system against him, hiding behind planets and moons, using gravity wells to slingshot missiles at impossible angles. His ships were bigger and more numerous, but the humans were faster and knew the battlefield intimately. When it was over, 227 Council ships were destroyed or disabled. 73 managed to escape back to Council space. Admiral Vorek's flagship was boarded by Henderson's Marines. The admiral himself was taken prisoner along with most of his senior officers. The punitive fleet had been annihilated. News of the defeat spread across the galaxy within hours. Species that had suffered under Council rule began whispering about possibilities they had never dared consider before. The Council's military superiority had been challenged and found wanting. Ambassador Creven sat in his chambers and stared at casualty reports he could not believe. The simple police action had become a disaster that threatened the Council's very existence. The news of Admiral Vorek's defeat reached every corner of the galaxy within a day. Species that had been part of the Council for centuries watched the reports with disbelief. A single human victory should not have been possible against 300 warships. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Wreckage from Council vessels drifted in Earth's solar system, and Admiral Vorek himself sat in a human detention cell. Ambassador Creven stood before the full Council assembly and faced questions he could not answer. How had humanity hidden such advanced weapons? Why had Council intelligence failed to detect Earth's military buildup? What did this defeat mean for Council authority? Creven had no good answers. He could only demand that the Council authorize a full invasion of Earth with overwhelming force. The Zerath Empire's high command calculated what such an invasion would cost. They would need at least 2,000 warships and 500,000 ground troops. The economic burden would be staggering. Supply lines would stretch across dozens of systems, and there was no guarantee of victory. If the humans could destroy 300 ships, what might they do against 2,000? Other Council species began asking uncomfortable questions. The Velan Collective pointed out that trade routes were already suffering from humanity's withdrawal. Human ships had carried goods between systems that now had no reliable transport. The Corian Federation quietly noted that Earth had been paying more in tribute than it received in benefits. Several minor species wondered aloud whether the Council's demands had been fair. Captain Jake Morrison gave his report to Admiral Carter and President Hayes. He described every moment of the battle, every tactic that had worked, and every weakness the Council fleet had shown. The enemy had been overconfident and inflexible. Their formations were designed for intimidation rather than combat. Their ships were powerful, but their commanders lacked creativity. Admiral Carter reviewed casualty reports from the human side. 12 ships had been damaged and 347 personnel had died. The cost was painful but far less than anyone had feared. Commander Ryan Blake's defensive network had performed beyond expectations. Captain Helen Grant's stealth squadrons had been devastatingly effective. Major Chris Taylor's fighters had proved that smaller vessels with good tactics could defeat larger ships. President Hayes prepared another address to the galaxy. This time his message was longer and more detailed. He explained that humanity had not sought conflict but would not accept subjugation. Earth had spent 30 years trying to be a good Council member. The Council had responded with exploitation and disrespect. Now humanity would chart its own course. Any species that wished to trade fairly and treat Earth as an equal was welcome. Any species that came with threats would face the same response the Council had received. The broadcast reached billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. Many dismissed it as empty boasting from a species that had won a single lucky battle, but others listened carefully. They heard a species willing to fight for its dignity. They saw an opportunity to escape from under the Council's control. Lieutenant Sophie Martinez commanded a destroyer patrolling the outer solar system when she detected a small ship approaching. The vessel broadcast a message in broken human language. It was from the Corian Federation, a species humanity had fought alongside in one of the Council's wars. The Corians asked permission to speak with Earth's leaders about matters of mutual interest. Admiral Carter authorized the meeting, and the Corian ship docked at Luna Base. Ambassador Julie Sanders, one of Earth's few remaining diplomats, met with the Corian representatives. They spoke carefully, aware that the conversation could be dangerous if the Council learned of it. The Corians explained that their species had suffered under Council rule for 2 centuries. They had watched humanity's defiance with great interest. They wanted to know if Earth would share defensive technology with other species. Julie Sanders brought the request to President Hayes. He consulted with Admiral Carter and military advisors. The decision was not simple. Sharing human technology could create new allies, but it might also give the Council access to Earth's secrets. After long discussion, President Hayes agreed to limited technology sharing with species that declared independence from the Council. The Corians were the first, but not the last. Within a month, representatives from 4 other species made secret contact with Earth. Each had their own story of Council abuse. Each was willing to risk everything for a chance at freedom. Admiral Carter established a training program to teach other species the tactics humanity had used against the Council fleet. Ambassador Creven watched his authority crumble. The Council had always maintained control through fear and economic pressure. Now both tools were failing. Species were learning they could resist. The economic disruption from Earth's withdrawal was worse than anyone had predicted. Worse still, the Xerath Empire was demanding action the other Council members were unwilling to support. Captain Morrison took command of a task force sent to break a Council blockade. The Council had attempted to cut off human trade routes through neutral space. 6 Council destroyers sat at a strategic jump point, turning back any ship that might be carrying human goods. Morrison's force included ships from 3 newly independent species. The combined fleet approached the blockade with weapons ready. The Council commander at the blockade sent a warning, but Morrison ignored it. The blockade ships opened fire and Morrison's fleet responded with overwhelming force. The battle lasted 20 minutes. 4 Council ships were destroyed and 2 surrendered. Morrison accepted their surrender and sent the surviving crews home with a message. Earth would not be isolated, and any attempt to enforce a blockade would meet the same fate. Colonel Amy Peterson supervised the construction of new defense platforms throughout the solar system. Every major moon, asteroid, and orbital path now held weapons that could be activated at a moment's notice. Earth would never again be vulnerable to surprise attack. The Council had taught humanity a valuable lesson about the importance of strength. Back on the Council station, internal divisions grew deeper. The Xerath Empire demanded total war against humanity. The Velan Collective argued that war would bankrupt them all. The Qualan hierarchy, one of the founding Council races, suggested that perhaps the Council's policies needed reform. Craven tried to hold the alliance together but could feel it fracturing. President Hayes received reports that 12 species had now withdrawn from Council authority. Each had followed humanity's example, simply refusing to comply with Council demands. Some had faced military threats, but none had been attacked. The Council's resources were stretched too thin. They could not fight wars on a dozen fronts simultaneously. Admiral Carter met with the leaders of the newly independent species. They formed a loose alliance dedicated to mutual defense. No empire, no central authority, just free peoples willing to help each other resist tyranny. It was a radical idea in a galaxy that had known nothing but hierarchy for thousands of years. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the Valiant and looked at the tactical display. Human ships now traveled freely through space that the Council had once controlled. Trade was actually increasing as species discovered they could negotiate directly without Council interference. The galaxy was changing in ways no one could have predicted 3 months ago. Ambassador Creven sat alone in his quarters and realized his career was over. The Council he had served faithfully for decades was dying, species were leaving, trade was collapsing, and military defeats were piling up. He had pushed humanity too far, and humanity had pushed back harder than anyone thought possible. The old order was finished, and he had no idea what would replace it. On Earth, people celebrated their victory, but Admiral Carter remained cautious. The Council still had thousands of ships and vast resources. They would not give up easily. More battles were coming and humanity needed to be ready. But for the first time in 30 years, Earth faced the future as a free world that answered to no one but itself. 3 months after the battle, the galaxy looked completely different from what it had been. 20 species had now withdrawn from Council authority and more were considering it. The economic system that had enriched Council members for centuries was collapsing. Trade routes that had always flowed through Council-controlled space were being rerouted. Species were discovering they could trade directly with each other without paying Council fees or following Council regulations. Admiral Lisa Carter traveled to the Corian homeworld aboard a IO, heavily armed diplomatic vessel. The Corians had been the first species to openly ally with humanity, and now they wanted to formalize that alliance. Captain Jake Morrison commanded the escort fleet, 12 human ships that demonstrated Earth's commitment to protecting its new friends. The journey through space that had once been firmly under Council control felt strange. No one challenged their passage. No one demanded explanations or permits. The Corian capital city was beautiful in ways that reminded Carter of Earth. Green spaces mixed with tall buildings, and the people moved with purpose and energy that came from newfound freedom. Corian leader Ven greeted Carter with genuine warmth. She had led her people's withdrawal from the council despite death threats from Ambassador Creven. Now she wanted to create something lasting, an alliance based on mutual respect rather than fear. Carter and Ven spent 2 days negotiating the terms of their alliance. Unlike council agreements that had always favored the powerful, this treaty gave equal rights to both species. They would share technology, defend each other's borders, and make decisions together. Ambassador Julie Sanders helped draft the language and marveled at how simple negotiations could be when both sides actually wanted fairness. While Carter negotiated, Commander Ryan Blake met with Corian military leaders. They wanted to learn human defensive tactics and offered to share their own expertise in energy weapons. Blake found the Corians to be quick learners who asked intelligent questions. They had spent 2 centuries as council subjects but retained their warrior traditions. Given proper weapons and training, they would be formidable allies. Back on Earth, President Daniel Hayes addressed growing concerns from some citizens. Many people worried that making alliances would drag humanity into new conflicts. Hayes explained that isolation was not safety. The council would never forgive Earth's defiance. Better to have friends who could help in the fights ahead. The alternative was facing council wrath alone. On the council station, the situation grew more desperate. Ambassador Creven had been stripped of most of his authority after the military disaster. The Zerath Empire blamed him for the failed punitive fleet. Other species blamed him for not preventing the exodus of members. He had become a convenient scapegoat, while the real problems went unaddressed. The Valen Collective sent secret messengers to Earth. As the galaxy's most successful merchants, they understood better than anyone how badly the Council's collapse would hurt trade. They proposed a compromise. Earth could have independence and fair treatment if humanity would help stabilize galactic commerce. President Hayes rejected the offer. The Council had no authority to grant Earth what humanity had already taken. If the Velan wanted to trade, they could do so as equals or not at all. Captain Helen Grant led a mission to protect a convoy of ships from 4 different species. The Council had sent raiders to attack vessels trading with the independent worlds. Grant's stealth destroyers caught the raiders by surprise and destroyed 3 of their ships. The 4th escaped to report that even Council military actions were failing. The raiders had expected easy targets but found themselves outmatched. Major Chris Taylor trained fighter pilots from 6 different species at a facility on Mars. Each species had different strengths and weaknesses. The insectoid Thran had incredible reflexes but poor long-range vision. The massive Hurlon were physically strong but slow in their movements. Taylor developed training programs that played to each species' advantages. He taught them to work together, covering each other's weaknesses. Admiral Carter returned from Corian space with a signed treaty and immediately traveled to meet with representatives from 3 more species. The alliance was growing faster than anyone had expected. Each new member brought resources and capabilities that strengthened the whole group. The Thran had advanced sensor technology. The Hurlon produced incredible amounts of food. The Palan possessed medical knowledge far beyond human understanding. Lieutenant Commander Paul Henderson took a team to investigate reports of a council attack on a mining colony. They arrived to find the colony destroyed and 300 civilians dead. The attack had been vicious and unnecessary. The miners had been neutral, not even aligned with the independence movement. Henderson sent detailed reports back to Earth along with recordings that showed council ships firing on unarmed facilities. President Hayes broadcast the recordings across the galaxy. He let the evidence speak for itself. The council that claimed to represent civilization and order was murdering civilians to maintain its crumbling power. The broadcast had exactly the effect Hayes intended. 5 more species withdrew from the council within a week. Public opinion across the galaxy turned sharply against the council leadership. The Qualan hierarchy, one of the founding council races, sent an unofficial delegation to Earth. They came in secret, afraid of how the Zerath Empire would react. The Qualan diplomats admitted that the council had become corrupt and tyrannical. They wanted to know if there was a way to reform the institution rather than destroy it. Admiral Carter told them honestly that reform was not humanity's concern. Earth would build something new with species that wanted freedom. The old council could evolve or die based on its own choices. Commander Blake detected a massive council fleet gathering near Zerath territory. Intelligence suggested they were preparing for one final assault on Earth. This fleet was larger than anything humanity had faced before. Nearly 1,000 ships, including the Zerath Empire's elite forces. President Hayes ordered full mobilization. Every human ship was recalled. Every defense platform was activated. Earth's allies were asked to send whatever help they could. Captain Morrison took command of the defense coordination. He had 50 human capital ships, 100 destroyers and frigates, and 200 fighters. The Corians sent 30 ships. The Thran sent 50. Other allies contributed smaller forces. The combined fleet numbered less than 400 vessels against 1,000 council ships. The numbers were not encouraging, but Morrison had advantages the council did not. He knew his territory perfectly. His people were fighting for their homes, and the enemy was overconfident despite their earlier defeat. The council fleet arrived at the edge of the solar system with great ceremony. This time they were commanded by Admiral Kresh, the Zerath Empire's most decorated officer. He had studied the previous battle and believed he understood human tactics. He had brought overwhelming force and planned to crush the humans through sheer numbers. His ships moved in tight formations designed to maximize firepower and minimize the effectiveness of human hit-and-run tactics. Morrison watched the enemy approach and felt calm settle over him. This was the moment everything had been building toward. If humanity lost this battle, Earth would be subjugated forever. If they won, the council was finished. There was no middle ground. He activated the communication network and spoke to every ship in his fleet. He told them they were not fighting for the council or for some abstract principle. They were fighting for the right to live free. Every person listening understood what was at stake. Admiral Carter stood in the command center beneath Luna's surface and watched tactical displays showing the approaching enemy. She had spent 30 years preparing for this moment. Every weapon system was ready. Every contingency had been planned for. Now it came down to whether human determination could overcome numerical superiority. She thought about the generations who would come after, who would live in freedom or slavery depending on what happened in the next few hours. Then she pushed the emotion aside and focused on the tactical situation. The council fleet crossed into the inner solar system. Admiral Kresh broadcast a final surrender demand. He gave humanity 1 hour to comply or face total destruction. Morrison's response was to activate the first wave of defense platforms. The battle for Earth's future had begun. The battle at Neptune's orbit became the turning point in galactic history. Admiral Kresh had brought 1,000 ships expecting to overwhelm Earth's defenses through sheer numbers. What he found instead was a coordinated defense that turned his advantage into a liability. Commander Ryan Blake activated defense platforms that had been hidden throughout the outer solar system. These were not the same platforms from the first battle. Earth's engineers had spent 3 months improving them with lessons learned from combat. The first wave of missiles came from 6 different directions simultaneously. Admiral Kresh's tight formations meant that ships could not maneuver without risking collision with their neighbors. 36 council vessels were destroyed in the opening minutes. Kresh ordered his fleet to spread out, but Captain Helen Grant's stealth destroyers were already moving through the gaps in his formation. Her ships fired electromagnetic pulse weapons that disabled council cruisers before they even knew they were under attack. Captain Jake Morrison led the main human fleet in a direct assault on the council's left flank. His ships moved fast and hit hard, targeting command vessels and sensor arrays. Major Chris Taylor's fighter squadrons weaved through the enemy formation like angry insects, their missiles bypassing shields and striking vulnerable points. The fighters were small and numerous, impossible for the large council ships to track effectively. Admiral Kresh tried to regroup, but found himself fighting a dozen separate battles instead of one large engagement. Human forces kept hitting him from unexpected angles while Allied ships provided supporting fire. The Corian vessels had powerful energy weapons that could punch through council shields. The Thran fighters had sensors that could track cloaked ships. The Hurlon frigates were slow but incredibly tough, absorbing damage that would have destroyed human vessels. The battle raged for 8 hours. Admiral Carter watched from Luna Base and made tactical adjustments as opportunities appeared. She saw patterns in how the council fleet moved and sent orders that exploited those patterns. Lieutenant Commander Paul Henderson's Marines boarded 3 disabled Council ships and captured their databases. The information would help humanity understand Council military doctrine even better. Admiral Kresh realized he was losing. His 1,000 ships were being carved apart by a smaller but far more effective force. He sent desperate messages to the Council station demanding reinforcements. Ambassador Creven, watching from the Council chambers, could only shake his head. There were no reinforcements. This was everything the Zerath Empire could spare. If this fleet failed, the Council had nothing left. Colonel Amy Peterson commanded the ground-based defense platforms on Luna. Her railguns fired solid projectiles at incredible speeds, destroying Council ships that came too close to Earth. She worked in coordination with orbital platforms and fleet elements, creating overlapping fields of fire that the enemy could not avoid. Every shot was calculated for maximum effect. Earth's defenders fought with precision that came from knowing they were protecting their home. By the 10th hour, the Council fleet was broken. 600 ships had been destroyed or disabled. The survivors fled in disorder, abandoning formation discipline in their panic. Admiral Kresh's flagship took a direct hit from one of Peterson's railguns and exploded in a ball of expanding gas. The Admiral died along with his entire command staff. The remaining Council ships jumped to faster than light travel without waiting for orders, fleeing in whatever direction offered escape. Captain Morrison surveyed the battlefield and felt no joy in victory. Human casualties had been heavy. 30 ships destroyed and 2,000 personnel dead. The Allied forces had lost almost as many. But Earth had survived and the Council's military power was shattered beyond repair.
He ordered rescue operations to begin recovering survivors from damaged ships, both human and enemy. President Daniel Hayes received the casualty reports and addressed Earth's population.
He spoke of sacrifice and courage, of people who had given everything to protect humanity's freedom. He promised that their deaths would not be forgotten. Then he turned his attention to the galaxy beyond Earth. The Council was finished as a political entity, but the vacuum it left behind needed to be filled with something better. Within a week of the battle, 15 more species withdrew from Council authority. The exodus became a flood. The Villain Collective officially dissolved its ties to the Council and offered to help coordinate independent trade networks. The Qualan hierarchy announced it would no longer support Council military actions. Even some Zerath worlds began questioning their empire's leadership. Ambassador Creven sat in his empty office and stared at reports documenting the Council's collapse. In 6 months, an institution that had lasted 1,000 years had fallen apart. He had spent his entire career serving the Council, and now it was dying. Part of him wanted to blame the humans for destroying everything. But in honest moments, he admitted that the Council had destroyed itself through arrogance and greed. Humanity had simply refused to be another victim. Admiral Carter traveled across the galaxy meeting with leaders from dozens of species. She proposed creating a new organization based on principles the Council had never accepted. No species would be forced to join. No empire would dominate. Each member would have equal voice regardless of size or military power. Disputes would be resolved through arbitration rather than force. Trade would be free and fair. It was a radical vision that many species found appealing after centuries of Council oppression. The Free Systems Alliance formally came into existence 4 months after the Great Battle. 40 species signed the founding charter in a ceremony broadcast across the galaxy. President Hayes represented Earth alongside leaders from worlds that had suffered under Council rule. They pledged to defend each other's independence and work together for mutual prosperity. It was not a perfect solution, and there would be conflicts ahead. But it was better than what had come before. Captain Morrison received promotion to Admiral and took command of the Alliance fleet. His task was to defend against any remaining Council forces and protect trade routes. He assembled a command staff that included officers from a dozen species. They did not always agree on tactics or strategy, but they learned to work together. The Alliance fleet became a symbol of what cooperation could achieve. The remnants of the Council tried one last diplomatic effort. They sent a delegation to Earth, offering humanity a leadership position in a reformed Council. President Hayes met them in the same office where he had decided to end negotiations months earlier. He listened politely to their proposal and then gave his answer. The Council had 30 years to treat humanity fairly. They had chosen exploitation instead. That choice had consequences. Earth would not help rebuild an empire that had caused so much suffering. The Council delegation left Earth knowing their mission had failed. Within a month, the Council station was abandoned. The organization that had ruled half the galaxy simply ceased to exist. Some species tried to maintain the old systems, but without the military power to enforce compliance, their efforts failed. The Age of Empires was ending. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Freedom flagship of the Alliance fleet. He looked at the tactical display showing hundreds of ships from dozens of species, all working together to patrol a galaxy that was slowly learning to live without tyrants. It had started with a simple decision to say no to an unreasonable demand. That decision had cost thousands of lives and changed the course of history. Commander Blake finished installing the last automated defense platform at the edge of human space. Earth was now protected by a network that would make any future attack incredibly costly. But Blake hoped that such defenses would never be needed again. The galaxy was changing. Species were learning that cooperation was more profitable than conquest. Ambassador Julie Sanders opened the first Alliance Trade Conference. Representatives from 60 species gathered to discuss commerce, mutual aid, and cultural exchange. There were arguments and disagreements, but no threats of military action. Problems were solved through negotiation and compromise. It was messy and slow, but infinitely better than the Council's method of imposing solutions through force. President Hayes stood before the United Earth Assembly and reflected on what humanity had achieved. Earth had refused to bow, and in doing so had freed not just itself but countless others. The price had been high, but the result was a galaxy where freedom meant something real. Future generations would face new challenges, but they would face them as free people who owed no allegiance to distant empires. The galaxy had pushed humanity too far. Humanity had pushed back, and in that moment of defiance, something new and better had been born. The age of the Galactic Council was over. The age of free peoples had begun, and at the heart of this new order stood Earth, not as a conqueror or ruler, but as proof that dignity and freedom were worth any cost.